When Roger Corman pitched the idea of filming the stories of Edgar Allan Poe to the executives at American International Pictures, one of the major objections they posed to him was, these stories have been forced on school kids as assigned reading for generations. Why would they pay money to see them as movies? Well, in the case of Poe, that wasn't true, and the Poe films continued to generate income for AIP for many years and for many subsequent film companies. But it sadly is true of films based on the works of Nathaniel Hawthorne. His works like Scarlet Letter and House of the Seven Gables carry with them a kind of stigma from being forced on kids as homework. Also, Hawthorne isn't much of a visual or cinematic writer. He's much more internal, and in comparison to Poe, he's much less baroque, macabre, violent, intense, and cinematic overall. Hawthorne's stories don't have razor-wielding orangutans, people buried alive, or bodies hacked up and stuck under the floorboards. They do, however, have gothic and supernatural overtones, and just as importantly, they're in the public domain. Hawthorne remains a great member of America's literary canon, most specifically the New England branch. His peer and friend Herman Melville dedicated Moby Dick to him with the inscription as a token of admiration for his genius. He was not a particularly prolific writer in his own lifetime because he mainly worked day jobs to support his family, but his novel, The Scarlet Letter, became one of the very first widely distributed novels in America and a bestseller. He was well received in his lifetime and did well, and didn't live a dissolute or particularly exciting or lurid life like, say, Poe did. Hawthorne's great-great-grandfather, John Hawthorne, was a judge who presided over the Salem witch trials, and a kind of lingering guilt that Hawthorne felt for it was intense enough that he changed his name to Hawthorne from Hawthorne, and wrote continually about America's puritanical heritage of repression and witch hunting. Hawthorne's novels also have a kind of proto-feminism to them, and he was excellent at writing well-rounded female characters, like Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter and Hepzibah Pynchon in The House of the Seven Gables. As most school kids know, The Scarlet Letter is the story of Puritan woman Hester Prynne in 17th century Massachusetts, who has a child out of wedlock, Pearl, and is pilloried by the locals. She's forced to stand in shame in front of the entire town and have a scarlet letter A placed on her dress for adulteress, which she has to wear in shame for the rest of her life. In reality, the father of the child is local preacher Arthur Dimmesdale, and to her absolute horror, her actual husband returns to Massachusetts, takes on the name Chillingworth, and proceeds to torment them as much as he can. In the end, Dimmesdale dies, confessing his guilt to the locals and showing that he has a letter A, a kind of stigmata, on his chest. Although there were several silent versions of The Scarlet Letter, probably the best and most famous is the 1926 MGM version, directed by Victor Sjöström. Sjöström was generally considered the father of the Swedish cinema, and he had a strong visual sense, which carried over into his supernatural drama masterpiece, The Phantom Carriage. Here in America, he directed Lon Chaney several times in films like He Who Gets Slapped, and later, as an actor, starred in Ingmar Bergman's Wild Strawberries. The film stars Lillian Gish giving a beautiful and sensitive performance as Hester Prynne, Lars Hansen as Dimmesdale, and ubiquitous silent star Henry B. Walthall as Chillingworth, who, with his mad vagrant's beard, looks more than a little like John Barrymore would in Svengali several years later. The film is very sympathetic to its two romantic leads, and rather than beginning the story with Hester's stand of shame in front of the townspeople, it spends about the first hour or so on their courtship. and develops an extraordinary sensitivity towards their plight, as well as showing the ridiculousness of the draconian mores of puritanical society. It continually pokes fun at Puritan life and does so very successfully. One gag was carried over into later versions involving a several-foot-long ear trumpet that an engaged couple would have to whisper through to communicate rather than actually talk until they were married. It was a kind of audio bundling. The film has a very strong visual sense, with plenty of moving camera work, but never overdone, and still holds up very well.
Hester Prynne, so that all men may know you are guilty of the sin of adultery, and shun you as a thing of evil, it is now ordered that you shall wear upon your bosom for the rest of your natural life the Scarlet Letter A.
In 1934, the first sound version of the Scarlet Letter was produced by Majestic Pictures. It was a relatively low-budget production, shot in about a month in the spring of 1934. It starred former silent star Colleen Moore in her final film role as Hester, and H.B. Walthall reprising his role as Chillingworth. The film doesn't compare favorably to the 1926 Sjöström version. It's visually fairly flat, with a lot of static, theatrical-looking shots. The director, Robert Vignola, obviously didn't know quite how to make the shift from silent to sound filmmaking. The film becomes what Howard Hawks called pictures of people talking. There's not much moving camera work, except for one very striking and extraordinarily effective shot where the camera moves in on Hester and her baby and her stand of shame, and all the way in on the Scarlet Letter itself. It's an exceedingly effective moment.
It would be easier to take the wheel off if we removed the water casks.
Quiet. I was about to do so. This work would go much faster were my helper a man instead of a midget.
Oh, yea?
Aye.
My name is Samson, and I'm as strong as my name betoken.
Sayest thou?
Sayest I.
The film is peppered with comic relief that is neither comic nor a relief, involving Alan Hale and some other buffoonish comedians doing a kind of lame parody of what appears to be the courtship of Miles Standish. It doesn't work and was roundly criticized even at the time of its release. The film co-stars Cora Sue Collins, who was a major child star of the 1930s. She had played the young Garbo in Queen Christina, and has many other films, including the excellent Black Moon, co-starring Fay Wray. The film was made after the dawn of the Hays Code, the production code, so there's a generally moralizing tone that wasn't there in the 1926 version. There's far less sympathy for the romantic leads, and a general sense of guilt and what have we done, and wasn't that terrible. The Hollywood Reporter's July 6, 1934 review was brutal, headlined, "Scarlet Letter Badly Done." Quote, "Pity Nathaniel Hawthorne. The production that Majestic Pictures have given his The Scarlet Letter almost succeeds in making the old classic ridiculous. The cast was, quote, burdened with the highest of high-flown dialogue, and they pointed out how a character who is supposed to say, oh yay, pronounces it, oh yeah. Their reviewer called Vignola's direction, quote, somnolently slow, and the script, quote, which treats the old tale with no respect at all and won't even hand it some crutches when it falls down. In closing, they wrote, if it were not for the theme, which is insisted upon through all the many, many reels, except for the comedy sequences, the picture would have some value for children as being a fairly adequate portrayal of life in Massachusetts in the 1600s. However, it is a bitter and bewildering educational pill. It is simply not for any house, anywhere. Meaning, of course, any movie house.
Stop!
Stop!
People of Massachusetts, ye that have deemed me holy, you that have loved me, behold in me the one sinner of the world. At last I stand where I should have stood 5 years ago by the side of Hester Prynne.
Not true. No, it's not true. He accuses himself falsely. His illness has unbalanced his mind.
No, at last I see clearly.
Considerably more successful was the 1979 four-hour TV version, starring Meg Foster as Hester Prynne, John Hurd as Dimmesdale, and the great Kevin Conway as Chillingworth. It's a rather staid and polite version, but it's very faithful and visually strong. The last major adaptation of the Scarlet Letter was Roland Joffe's big-budget version in 1995, starring Demi Moore as Hester Prynne, Gary Oldman as Dimmesdale, and Robert Duvall as Chillingworth. Joffe and his screenwriters made significant changes to the story, including a whole subplot about war with the Native Americans in the territory, and they even added on a happy ending, where Hester and Dimmesdale get to leave happily ever after. The film was roundly trounced by critics and audiences, and developed a very, very bad reputation, which seems to have soured Hawthorne's ability to get adapted to film. One of the better adaptations of Hawthorne's work was the 1940 adaptation of The House of the Seven Gables, starring Vincent Price, Nan Gray, and George Sanders. Undoubtedly the most popular of Hawthorne's other novels is The House of the Seven Gables, a New England Gothic set in Salem, Massachusetts. The story follows the Pynchon family and a curse that haunts them, placed on them by a man named Maul, who was falsely accused by one of their ancestors of witchcraft. The screenwriters significantly altered the story, but did so in a respectful and interesting way. It's a very visually sound film directed by Joe Mai, and it's also notably Price's first Gothic film. It was well received and has continually remained popular, and justifiably so. In the 1970s, American International Pictures intended to make their own version of The House of Seven Gables, based on the popularity of their version of Wuthering Heights, and because it was in the public domain. Lou Arkoff, the son of AIP's Sam Arkoff, once told me that after the Poe pictures at AIP, public domain was gold. House of Seven Gables was developed as a production for director Robert Fust, who had done Wuthering Heights and The Abominable Dr. Phibes for AIP. Fust wrote a script, and Patrick Tilley, who had written Wuthering Heights, also wrote one, and other screenwriters were involved, but so far none of these scripts have surfaced, and the film was never to be. One of the major Hawthorne adaptations of the 1960s was Sidney Salkow's Twice Told Tales, produced by Robert Kent. One of the major Hawthorne adaptations of the 1960s was Twice Told Tales, produced by Robert Kent and starring Vincent Price, when Price was doing several films with Kent. The movie was directed by Sidney Salkow, who considerably more successfully directed Price in The Last Man on Earth, and the film was obviously thoroughly patterned after Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe movies. It basically looks and feels like a Corman Poe movie if all of the elements that made them work were removed, except for Vincent Price. It's what a Poe movie would look like without a script by Richard Matheson, photography by Floyd Crosby, art direction by Daniel Haller, music by Les Baxter, or a better-than-average cast. The film is an anthology in the mode of Corman's Tales of Terror, with 3 Hawthorne stories: Dr. Heidegger's Experiment, Rappaccini's Daughter, and a thoroughly Baudelaireized version of The House of Seven Gables, each starring Price. The most successful of the 3 is probably Rappaccini's Daughter because it's the most faithful, and it stars Nancy Kovac, looking stunning and delivering a very strong performance as the daughter of a scientist who's created a poisonous garden and a daughter who is as poisonous and toxic to match to be able to live in it.
Since my father made me what I am, he used its poisons to change the chemistry of my blood. Watch that poor creature die. You would die if you touched me.
The film pointed up a major problem with adapting Hawthorne to film. Trying to pass him off as a horror author just wouldn't work. He worked in a Gothic mode, there were supernatural overtones, his work could be dark and sometimes even feature the devil himself, like his story Young Goodman Brown, but he was not a horror writer. the lingering specter of Puritanism and witch hunting in Hawthorne's fiction continues to resonate with readers, even if not with filmgoers.